Greetings and welcome. My name is Adam Neiman. I'm the Artistic Director of the Manchester Music Festival, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to this spotlight interview with pianist Craig Sheppard. Craig, welcome.
Thank you, Adam.
Such a pleasure to have you.
Yeah.
I want to read a little bit from your biography because there's just so many impressive items here that our audience really need to know about. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is just his shortened biography, but I'm going to read some parts of it. So Craig Sheppard was born in Philadelphia in November 1947. Following early studies with Dr. Lois Hedner and Susan Starr, he studied at the Curtis Institute under the legendary Eleanor Sokoloff, and earned his bachelor's and master's degrees at the Juilliard School, studying with Sasha Grodnitsky. He also worked with Claude Frank and Lillian Callier as a Fromm Fellow at Tanglewood, and with Rudolf Serkin and Pablo Casals at the Marlborough Festival, culminating in a nationwide tour in the Music from Marlborough series. In January 1972, Sheppard gave his New York debut at the Grace Rainey Rogers Auditorium of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. In September of the same year, he won the silver medal at the Leeds International Pianoforte Competition in England. During these years, he was also a bronze medal laureate of the Busoni, Dino Ciani, and Artur Rubinstein competitions. Moving to London in 1973, he performed with all the major orchestras in Great Britain on multiple occasions, including a recording of the Rachmaninoff Third Piano Concerto with the London Philharmonic, and many orchestras on the European continent, including the Berlin Philharmonic and the orchestras of La Scala, Milan. During the 20 years he lived in England, Sheppard taught at Lancaster University, the Yehudi Menuhin School, and the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, in addition to giving numerous concerts and master classes at both Oxford and Cambridge universities. Returning to this country in 1993 and taking up residence in Seattle, Sheppard quickly became a favorite at such venues as the Seattle Symphony, the Seattle Chamber Music Festival, and other local and regional arts organizations. Craig joined the faculty of the School of Music at the University of Washington in 1993. Sheppard's repertoire is eclectic, comprising 40-plus recital programs and over 60 concerti spanning all major eras of Western music. An avid chamber music player, musicians he has collaborated with include Wynton Marsalis, Jose Carreras, Victoria de los Angeles, and the Cleveland and Emerson String Quartets. In this country, he has soloed with the orchestras of Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago, Atlanta, Dallas, San Francisco, Rochester, and Seattle, among others. Conductors he has played with include Sir Georg Scholti, Erich Leinsdorf, Kurt Sanderling, James Levine, Michael Tilson Thomas, Aaron Copland, Yehudi Menuhin, Esa-Pekka Salonen, David Zinman, and Leonard Slatkin. A much sought-after pedagogue, Sheppard's students in both Europe and the United States have won numerous local, national, and international competitions over the years. A number of former students hold positions at universities throughout the United States, Europe, and Asia. With his colleague, Dr. Robin McCabe, Sheppard is co-founder of the highly successful Seattle Summer Piano Institute at the University of Washington, a 2-week intensive course for gifted young pianists from around the world who wish to learn about all aspects of music making, performing, and career building. Sheppard's CDs can be found on the Romeo, A.T. Berlin, Philips, Sony, and Chandos labels. A voracious reader, he is known for his broad academic interests, particularly foreign languages. Whew! Unbelievable, Craig. It's an amazing resume.
I don't know, is that me?
When you hear such a resume read, does that resonate with you? Do you feel that you were there for all those events, or does it all just blur into one large blur in your mind?
That's hard to say, Adam. I obviously had to be there. And I enjoyed being there. It's been largely fun. As you know, traveling takes its toll. I remember once being in the north of England having played the G minor Mendelssohn Concerto, which takes all of about 16, 17 minutes, and finishing by 8:15 in the evening. It was a fairly major city up in the north. I didn't know anybody, and this was a Saturday evening, and I didn't know what to do with myself. I always bring to read. But the fact is, after you play a concert with people, and that was the difficult part, that sort of career, and I'm not happy not to be doing it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, the Manchester Music Festival is really looking forward to finally getting you to come and play for us in person. So as our patrons know, Craig was scheduled to come last year in 2019, and he had an illness and he was unable to be there. Then he was scheduled to be there this year for the 2020 festival, but of course, as everyone knows, we had to pivot to the digital concert hall online rather than an in-person festival. But Craig has been kind enough to pledge that he will come back in 2021 as long as we can have a festival. So Craig, I thank you for that.
Right. Thank you, Adam. Yeah.
Of course. So, Craig, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about our history so that our audience knows, how we met. So I calculated that we met 23 years ago at the Seattle Chamber Music Festival.
How dare you? Okay, so we met 23 years ago, and you were a great favorite and still are at the Chamber Festival here in Seattle. And go on, because history there. Go on.
Well, yeah, we played alongside each other for many years. Pianists, so just so our patrons understand, when pianists meet up at festivals and play in the same concert, they're not necessarily playing together, although we have done some forehand work. But generally, pianists play kind of alongside each other because they might appear in one or two pieces on the same program. And so we had that opportunity to listen to each other, and I always felt such joy and admiration for getting to share a program with you, Craig.
I still remember your arch trio, but this must be 20 years ago, but it was amongst other things, Adam. But you have to tell everybody about Ariella, your wife.
Well, this is the other connection. So my wife, Ariella, whom our audience has heard several times as a pianist, was a student of Craig Sheppard at the University of Washington. She did her undergraduate work with him. And so when I met Ariella, who was turning pages for me at the Seattle Chamber Festival, I became even further connected with Craig.
Yeah. I didn't know when Ariella was sitting there. She was probably, no, you couldn't have been on stage that day. It was a trio, so you were backstage or whatever. But that set the stage for the two of you coming together, which was great. I'm always happy. It's one of the great things is bringing people, as I'm sure you do as well. And I was really happy it happened.
It was fun, and I think the Seattle Chamber Festival has a great track record for creating marriages between people, because I know that several prominent musical couples met there, and yeah. But I remember how protective you were of Ariella when I met her, because she was precious to you. She was one of your little mafia members, I think.
Oh, the mafia! Now that's another thing. We had a whole group, probably still do, of young Asian women on the floor of our music, which is where it's practiced. And Ariella was sort of the ringleader there. So one day we got to get a picture, and okay, come on, let's mafia together. And I didn't realize what I said. Now, of course, some people might take offense at this, but they all laughed, and that became the group. They were called the mafia because they ruled, and they did rule the third floor. But Ariella was the ringleader.
Oh yeah, still is.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So yeah. Craig, I want to talk to you a little bit about your repertoire, because, among other things, your repertoire is truly astonishing. And you played so many things. I just want to read to the audience some of the projects that I looked up that you've done, and correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe there's more, but you've done the complete Bach well-tempered clavier, all the keyboard suites and inventions as well, and I think the Art of the Fugue, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
You've done complete Beethoven sonatas, and I'm assuming you've done the complete Beethoven concertos as well.
Not recorded them, but I've played them, yes.
Performed them. You have performed the complete works of Brahms.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard some of those recitals. You've performed all the Years of Pilgrimage by Franz Liszt.
Yeah.
You've done, in Debussy's work, you've done both books of Images, the complete etudes, and did you also do the complete preludes as well?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You've done the complete Shostakovich preludes and fugues, which in itself is a lifetime project. You've done the 3 last Schubert sonatas, probably other sonatas as well by Schubert, I'm assuming.
Sure.
And you've played virtually the entire chamber music canon.
The last thing is, I think there are many things in the chamber music canon that I would still like to do. I meant to do the Elgar Quintet several years ago at another festival outside Seattle, and that fell through for whatever reasons. They changed the repertoire at the last minute.
Right.
There are a number of pieces that I would really like to do before I'm not playing any longer, which who knows when,
Well, Craig, what drives your selection of repertoire?
Well, that's hard to answer, isn't it?
Yeah.
When I was younger, I was doing projects so much. Well, that's also not true. I did the complete Brahms at the Wigmore Hall in 1979, early 79. I did all 5 recitals within about 5 or 6 weeks of each other, which I would never do today. I don't think I could. I was also playing the Paganini variations of Brahms in those years, and it's too difficult right now. The stretches, and it really is. I left that out recently when I played the Brahms cycle again. And then a year or so later, the Klavierübung of Bach, which, as you know, except for Part 3, which has a lot of organ chorales and prelude, maybe preludes and fugue. That was the 6 partitas, and the overture, the Italian concerto, and of course the Gold variation, and the 4 duets of Part 3 of the Klavierübung, which are fabulous. They're sort of glorified two-part inventions. I love them. Mm-hmm. Those were the only 2 sorts of works. I did it as much younger. I could just bring a recital of pieces that I loved. And what's interesting is that I did the Schumann Humoresque, for example, on a program, back in the early 80s. Mm-hmm. And
I love that piece.
It's such a unique piece, but it's funny, it's not a great audience piece. The musician and pianist adore, but it's not a great, at this point in my life, I don't just try to play what I like, because I feel if you play what you like, you're going to sell the product to the audience. Mm-hmm. But right after that, I played the Peled, Opus 21, and to this day, they're the great thing that Schumann wrote. And the 2 of them together, there are so many cross things between them. I don't want to go into that, but it's interesting that I chose that without knowing that. I just chose them because I loved it at the time. Mm-hmm. Now, how does one choose repertoire? What do you do? I mean, you when we're younger, we're allowed by most organizations, to recitals, we're allowed to put things that we love. Occasionally they'll say to us, don't do that because the audience won't like it, or do that because they will. But for the most part, we choose things that we love. And I always included, because bless her heart, Eleanor at the Curtis insisted every week that I bring in Bach. And for a 17, 18-year-old, we want to play Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky, like this. Mm-hmm. And I would say, well, Mrs. Sokoloff, how about Prokop? And she would say, Bach. And it was sort of a mantra. We used to joke about it. But that set, I loved Bach, but I didn't feel close to it. It's such a different idiom. Now you look at the page, at least of the editions we have today, and there's nothing on the page. What do you do with it?
Right.
And this was the beginning of and I do play a great deal. I've played most of the big works. I have, and recorded a lot. How does one choose? How do you choose repertoire?
I mean, for me, it's a mix of things like what you're describing. There are times when I do set out to learn and perform a project because I want to be involved in that project, and then there are other times when I just accumulate repertoire sort of by the wayside, like I want this little piece here and that piece there, and then I accumulate. So I'm sure it's much the same for you. But you've done such big projects, like for example at Meany Hall at the University of Washington, you've put on very purposefully like entire canons. So you've done all the 32 Beethoven sonatas there for a live recording, which is phenomenal. You did almost all the Brahms works, and I was there for I think a couple of those performances. So you also do sometimes set out to perform an entire canon of works, right?
Yes. Well, Brahms suppose because I had before, and I sort of brought it back because I thought maybe I could do it a little bit better after 30 years, whatever. Beethoven, the Beethoven sonata, well, no, this is something which all pianists need to address at this point. The so-called new testament of the piano repertoire, and I hadn't played all of them. In fact, quite a number of the earlier I played, so I learned for the cycle. But you know, Adam, the other thing is that there's so many things going through my mind. I feel very strongly that when we have learned and played pieces, we teach them better. And that really has been at the back of my mind in doing a lot of this repertoire. I can't say that nobody plays everything at the best. You know, we all gravitate to certain pieces, and some are better, some maybe not quite so good. It's not the point. We get to know them better by having performed them. Luckily, the audience is willing to through it, you know, and hopefully we give them something to turn. But you know, but still, teaching has been my focus the past 20 years, learning these. Then that's why, you know, when I came to the Bach example right after the Beethoven sonatas, I figured when you get into a pattern of suddenly cycles, you think differently.
Yes. So
I wanted the well-tempered clavier, which I had played a great deal of, both books. And between the Beethoven sonata 3, 4, and the whole Bach group or whatever, I did do these 6 partitas in one program because I had played those at the Wigmore years ago. And you know, again, such incredible stuff. And then after that, I guess I continued. It's sort of like when a dog tastes blood, isn't it? and so I did the next time in 2010. I did the 3 Schubert sonatas, and then in 11, which was the Liszt year, I did the years of which I again played many of them, and then I can't remember in 12. I was interspersing this Brahms, you see, and then in 13 came along Debussy, didn't it? So we did the preludes and the etudes, which I were younger, the etudes. It seems like a bit of a, but you see when the Liszt year or whatever like that, the excuse to make a program like that. I wouldn't normally done the years of Pilgrim, but it was Liszt's birthday. You got to celebrate.
Absolutely.
You know, that's how this all came about. Then I was having a conversation with our director, who's just stepped down, Richard Carpin, a composer of electronic music, and we were talking about projects, and he said something about Shostakovich, and I said, you know, that's an awfully big project. And he looked at it so well, you know, like this. And I came home and opened the volume. Adam, I had only played 3 of those before. But when I opened Preludes and Fugues and saw the web, I mean, it blew my mind really. It is the project, even more than the fugue, which came subsequently. The Shostakovich, in a way, is the thing I'm most proud of, because it took a lot. It took a lot to, and I was every single bit of it. You know, that's not fair, is it? That you can everything that you do.
Yeah. No, I completely understand. Well, I think you alluded to it because you were talking about how when you learn certain repertoire, it makes you a better teacher because you're invested in the piece personally. What I was wondering is, when you work on these really large-scale projects, so let's say all the works by a composer, or nearly all the works by a composer, do you feel that your perspective on that composer's music changes?
Absolutely. This was drew me to doing drums back in 1978, 79. I played it a lot all around England. A couple of times I played the cycle before I came to the Wigmore. I'm not going to go to the Wigmore the first time. And I kept thinking at the time, what a privilege this was to be able to see it from his baby step. Was 1819 with that scherzo of Opus 4, the first piece, the sonatas that he showed the Schumann, the first and second sonata. Actually, number 1 was written after number 2, but who cares? And you know, all the way to the Opus 119, we have such. What is that book, gentleman in Southern Illinois, that has all the complete works for piano that have ever been, and we have done such a tiny portion of the matter.
Yeah.
Tiny.
No, it's incredible. And those are just, when we're talking about piano music, we're of course talking about the piano music that we're familiar with, but then there's all the so-called obscure compositions, some of which are wonderful. Well, I also wanted to ask you what it was like, Craig, when you won the silver medal at the Leeds. I mean, you won several competitions. As I mentioned, you also were a prize winner in the Rubinstein, in the Busoni. But I'm sure the Leeds really propelled your UK career quite significantly, and you were thrown right into the limelight, and you lived for a number of years in the UK. You were a very young man. What was it like to be thrust into the limelight so quickly and at such a level?
That's daunting. You know, it's funny. I said years to the dean at Juilliard that I felt we were being pushed too soon. And I think at the time I said it to him, it was Gid Waldrop. I think I was about 21, and I was talking of these young pianists coming behind me, like at the age of 17, 18, whatever, who were really fantastic. And up there. And I remember the way he looked at me, but from his standpoint, I was very young.
Yeah.
I was talking about the ones that were younger at that point. That hasn't changed, and as you know, of course, the young kids today, today, Curtis is 80%, it seems, amongst the pianists from China, and they're all wonderful. There, I gave masterclass. I've seen this. I don't think they would knee up the back steps today. I came in when I was 17. I really think that I would have a hard time. I don't think I would get through that first round of whatever tapes. I was lucky because I was able to get to good schools with wonderful teachers, and I was able to grow, I think, fairly naturally. However, as you say, you're thrown into the limelight. It's difficult. I mean, where does one start? You're excited. They're actually listening to you. They're actually coming to your concerts because they've heard you on the BBC or they whatever. But as somebody saw me on the subway on the tube in London one day, and he said, "Aren't you so and so?" And this very well dressed man, and you know, I was so embarrassed that I actually ran out and got off the train. It embarrassed me. I'm not joking.
Wow.
You know, most people will say, "Well, yes, of course, no, thank you." You know, that was not me. Contrary, I think, maybe to what some people might think. And I was also a colleague colleagues, a lot of our colleagues in my age group were playing the same repertoire again and again and again. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to expand. I was a little too ambitious a few times. I expanded a little too quickly. And the repertoire wasn't maybe always just so right when I got on. And I got a reputation for that a little bit. As a friend of mine said, you can have a good reputation here, but you can destroy it in 1 year. It takes you 20 years to build it up again. But you have to learn by making those mistakes, I suppose.
Yeah.
It would.
Yeah.
Does that sort of your question?
It certainly does, because I think many people listening to this interview will be wondering, what is it like? Because it's not a typical life to be so young and to be thrust into the limelight with everyone kind of watching everything you do at all times. And I'm sure it's crossing people's minds. What is it like inside? Do you feel stifled by it? Does it energize you?
There's so many. For example, my first prom, when I played the F minor Chopin concerto in 1974 with Charles McCarris and the BBC Symphony, and you walk out on stage and there are 7,000 promers.
Yeah.
Or yesterday you were lucky to have 70, and now it's 7,000. That's tough.
Yeah.
And there are so incidents that happen. If I'm allowed to mention one of them, the following year was Aaron Copland's 75th birthday. And I had played with Copland in Buffalo at the invitation of Michael Tilson Thomas, who was then the conductor of the Buffalo Symphony. And I was to do Bartok 1 with Michael, and somehow it didn't work out, which was my fault, another story. Instead, I found myself playing with Copland, his piano concerto. So I did that 4 times. That was interesting. Copland was not a great conductor, but he was such an incredible man. The knowledge, he had such a brain. Silly word to use, I guess, a brain. We all have a brain, but you know what I mean. It was wonderful being, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
So the following, the BBC, knowing that I had that connection, said to me, Robert Ponsonby, who was the head of Radio 3 at the time, said, why don't you come and do the piano concerto, because it's going to be Copland's 75th birthday. So we had our rehearsals, and by the way, we also did the following week with the London Symphony at the studios in Maida Vale. But that week in London, we did it on stage at the Albert Hall with the BBC Symphony. And at the end of the first movement, I noticed and quite as a passage where the piano played quite a bit, and the cello and then the flute and then the violin, and after another seconds it comes more or less to a halt, and you go into the second movement, which is very jazzy. And I noticed when I was on stage that there's Copland on the podium, and I'm playing, and the cellos are not coming. Now this is so I looked over, knew they should have, and I looked whiter, and then I looked up and but he was sort of, because Copland was standing there. This is his own piece score, but he lost his place for some reason. And I nodded to the cello, and then I nodded the flute, and I nodded like this, and brought everybody in, and avoided a catastrophe, I think. And I heard afterward that my recollection of the thing, because one of the clarinetists in the orchestra is still a good friend, and so I heard afterward, in other words, that my recollection is correct. So we walked off, and Copland walked over to a gentleman who had on headphones and was sort of monitoring the whole thing. And he came back to me and he said, "Oh, Sheppard, that was live."
I guess it proves that even Aaron Copland was human, huh?
Oi, that was live. Forget that. I thought, well, okay. But even a man like Aaron Copland wondered, he did suffer, died when he was 90, and he suffered from dementia at the end of his life. And I even wonder if that was a moment, 75, I'm not too far off, where he just suddenly had a blank. It can happen.
Of course.
It can.
Craig, it's hard to put this into words, I'm sure. But if you had to distill what your teaching philosophy is, what is it that you hope your students gain from working with you?
I've always said, a teacher can only teach a student 2 or 3 things. You can teach them how to listen, what to listen for, and then how to do it. The rest is up to, and those are big, God, to listen, what to listen for, and then how to do it. I'm not big on exercises, on scales and stuff like that. I figure they have done them before they come to me, and I'm usually wrong, frequently wrong. I don't like teaching technique.
Mm-hmm.
My technique itself never came about that way. I never did chair knee. I mean, I hated it. I tried it. I really hated it. I did do Canon Hannon rather for about 2 weeks one summer. I did Doch 9 to a point. Those are wonderful exercises. But in general, I my own exercises up, which I've shown the kids. And my whole philosophy of playing, which I try to teach them, is based on the fact that piano playing is not only strength of fingers, which obviously we need to have, and independence of fingers, but also flexibility. And it's a mixture of strength of, the whole body, using the mechanism properly, which the mechanism is the whole body.
Yeah.
And then and flexibility, and I think they're equally important.
Mm-hmm.
I think students think so often of just finger strength, and it's important. But flexibility has so many things in it, because it's not just the flexibility of the mind, isn't it?
It is.
You have to, also the same, you have to be very, very precise. Same point, you have to be flexible. It's right. A difficult balance. It
makes me think of what Bruce Lee talked about in martial arts. Somebody asked him, because he had this incredible ability to strike with such strength, and he even had this 1-inch punch and all this kind of stuff. But he used to say that you had to move like water. It was really about that.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Glossy movement. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, water. Who doesn't love this? This is my favorite sounds in the whole world. Or almost anything to do with water.
Or you think about. It always strikes me when I'm walking in a sort of concrete universe. A city street, and you see concrete everywhere and asphalt, and then you just see a little flower coming up through the concrete, through a crack. That's it, isn't it? Right there, the flexibility.
One day I was working many years ago with Sir George in his studio. I think I was going to be playing the 491 Mozart with him in the London Philharmonic, and so we had a rehearsal downstairs, his studio back of the house, and down on because it sloped down, so whatever. And he suddenly said, "Come on out for a second." And he opened the doors in the back, and we went out into the garden where there was a vast number of roses. Mm-hmm. And he took one rose in his hand, and he said, "This is a greater creation than anything we can do."
Yeah.
I'll never forget that. This was this great man who had, the world at his feet.
Yeah.
And he only posed. Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes there's nothing more perfect, right?
Well, it's roses. I do tend to rise to anger quite quickly. I think a lot of artists do, a lot of people do. But if you thrust a rose in my face, all it needs, it has some sort of fragrance. Mm-hmm. If you do that, I go,
really?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to keep that in mind. Next time I see you mad at somebody.
Oh, absolutely. And the other thing that relaxes me, Adam, is walking by the ocean. Mm-hmm. or anything, waterfalls, but particularly I remember a number of years ago, Greg and I were down in Mendocino, California, above San Francisco, and we were walking along the cliff there, and just the crashing of the waves. I don't know what it is, I don't like loud sounds, but this is different.
Yeah.
It's because there's so much variety in that level of a wave crashing.
Well, it's not dissonant, right? There's a consonance to the loudness.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
And at the same time, once years ago in Thailand, I remember we were in a bungalow and there's underneath we were in a lagoon.
Yeah.
And so sleep, this fantastic.
Amazing.
I mean, those sounds and that way of being open to nature. Another thing, a friend of mine who's now over in the west of Oxford, he's stuck like the rest of us.
Yeah.
And said to me the other day on a call, he said, he was out jogging one day, or walking maybe, in the Chilterns. That was it, because my age, he doesn't jog anymore. But he said, young people coming by, and it just with pods in their ears, and he said you had of the nature, the sounds of the birds, the sounds of whatever animals, or the rustle of leaves, and they're not open to it.
Yeah.
Would you ever? I hate things in my ears anyway.
Right.
Occasionally use beats when I have to listen to music late at night, and if Greg's sleeping, whatever. Of course, I don't want to disturb him.
Sure.
But but in general, not to be open to your environment.
Craig, does that worry you? Do you see a real shift in the generational gap as far as the awareness of the outside world?
I suppose I do, but my parents or our parents said the same thing about us.
I suppose. Yeah.
So I think it's probably worse today, yes. I mean, every place, Adam, you go to a restaurant, Bali, we were about 10 years ago, ago now, and in Bali, which is a Hindu place, I thought it would be the most profoundly spiritual experience of my life. Turned out to be just the opposite. Every single restaurant you go into, there's this boom, 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 boom,
wow,
on a boom box, or else there's a band outside doing something quite similar, trying to approximate Western music. Shouldn't. Instead of, I'd rather hearing Balinese, which is fabulous, Yeah. And every place you go, you hear this, as you know, this kind of bombardment. You go into a supermarket and you hear rock music. You go into whatever. And you and I built differently. Musicians are built differently. Certainly classical musicians. I don't want it because when it's there, my ears go out to it.
Same here.
And I'm sure you are.
Yeah.
I had a colleague who said this yesterday on email. We need this input. We need this constant auditory bombardment because we have it in our heads. I'm sure stuff. I don't know what's going on in my head right now. I don't know. I mean, there's always thing going on there. Music, whatever. Sometimes if I give a lesson to a student on whatever Chopin or Beethoven sonata, a few hours later I'm eating lunch and that Beethoven sonata, darn it,
Oh yeah.
I'd like to be left alone, but I can't. It's there.
Yeah, little earworm.
Oh yeah.
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 Do you hear music all the time, Craig, in your mind when you're just walking around?
Not always.
Not always.
But frequently, but do you?
I do, and sometimes I can't identify it, which is weird. But I'll actually, and I guess maybe that's because I'm a composer, because I'll just hear music and sometimes I realize that it's mine and then I have to write it down. And then other times I realize it's somebody else's and I better not write it down.
That's not necessarily, well, there's nothing like plagiarism, is there? Yeah, I tried to compose and it was so awful I leave it to others.
Oh, you're probably too humble about that.
Not at all.
So Craig, you would agree that in general the solo pianist's life is quite solitary. But you and I both have this in common that we do a lot of chamber music. What is it about chamber music that draws you to the field? I
guess being with others and yeah. I think that's simply it. I mean, you are reaching out your ideas and you're getting ideas back.
Yeah.
Giving out feelings, you're getting back their feelings. You are, it's a meeting of minds. It's a meeting of minds. Becomes, I guess you could say it's spiritual. And I was privileged to work with a couple of the singers. One of them, Irina Arkhipova, the great mezzo-soprano, one of the most wonderful voices. And every time Irina came to I keep saying Seattle, to London, I was the one she worked with over maybe 8 years. It was really, you say, what is it with other people? Because Irina was old enough to be my mother. She had a son exactly my age, in fact. And she would stand there in my studio, and I would look up at her. Irina, is this okay? And she would say, "Niet, Craig, niet, naoborot." Well, that means no, Craig, just the opposite. Just the opposite. Then I would play something else. Taka, da, niet, Craig, naoborot. And that was, and so this thing of just the opposite, it became a joke between us,
I see.
And I do something wrong at the piano myself now when I'm practicing, or when I hear the students say that, I say "niet na abarot" to myself, "niet na abarot," because the kids wouldn't understand. But little things like that interaction with this great lady, it stays with you.
Yeah, it makes life worthwhile in a way, right?
To Los Angeles in the last years of her singing life. I mean, once I was playing Frauen Liebenleben up in Scotland with her, and I have to tell you, while she was singing, I could feel tears. It was so tender.
Wow.
I could feel tears coming into my eyes, and I had to say, Craig, stop it. You're on stage, and you can't do that. And of course, when we start to express emotion like that on stage, I think it's also not good for the music, because somehow we're not putting it into the music. I don't know what that mechanism is, but I think I'm right when I say that. Yeah,
we need a certain objectivity, right, in order to give it to others.
Absolutely. You need to keep a distance. I remember reading subsequently that Lawrence said the same thing. You need to keep a distance. I mean, who knew better about acting? Olivier.
True. Well, anyway. Jascha Heifetz used to also talk about that with his own playing. And, he would be accused of not being involved. I'm sure he was involved, but the playing comes across.
I mean, not involved.
Or this guy right here, Rachmaninoff, people used to, because he wouldn't emote with his face much, they'd say, oh, he wasn't emoting, which is complete nonsense.
Oh, the piano playing.
Yeah.
I know that our colleague Murray Pariah thinks that Rachmaninoff is one of the two great pianists of the 20th century. I couldn't agree more.
Same here.
And I was fortunate to know Rachmaninoff's niece, Sonia Satin, in London. She came to a lot of my concerts once we were introduced for 5-6 years. And she grew up in Dresden. Went to university there. She became a scientist. And her house, her family house, was bombed. When the Alps bombed 13th and 14th of February 1945, the first round was the British, the second round was the Americans. I hope I have that right, but it doesn't matter. In the second round, they all went into back. They heard these bombs falling all around. They come out, the family 2 or 3 doors completely obliterated, and she came out, and there is their family house completely destroyed. So she lived through all of that.
Wow.
She later went to Kent, and she went into nursing or something. She ran a boarding house in London, and then she retired. She had an incredible life. But what I'm getting to is that during the 30s, she spent a number of summers with her uncle, in Seynar, the house that
in
they
Switzerland.
had on Lake Lucerne.
Yeah.
And he loved little children. He his nieces and nephews and maybe grandchildren at that point. He loved playing. He loved laughing. She said he loved everything that we don't see in those pictures.
Yeah.
He in other words, she was trying to say he was very human.
Yeah.
He was,
Yeah.
That whole story, just to get punchline, he was very human.
Well, no, it's true. There's some video footage of Rachmaninoff that started to circulate a few years ago, and it's essentially home video footage from his family. And it's pretty it's extraordinary to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you see him playing with his children and his dogs and driving his little Model T Ford and looking very jovial and laughing a lot. And
the story had Rachmaninoff used to practice meticulously and very, very
slowly. Yes.
Jason's was there visiting in the third, and he walked around in the studio, which was separate, and he heard this going on, ba, 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 double notes.
Yep.
Real. And it took him about minutes to figure out that he was doing etude, the 25 number 6.
Right. I remember reading that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. I mean, how do you practice that slow? I don't.
I
try.
I came across that story around. I was about 18 when I first played the third Rachmaninoff with orchestra, and I'd already been playing the piece for about 3 years. I started it when I was 15 because it was my favorite piece when I was a teenager, and and so I'd had the piece in my hands for about 3 years, but I still didn't feel that comfortable with it. And then I came across that story. I was still a Juilliard student, and I decided to put it to the test. So I decided to try to practice the third concerto like that. Do you know that it took me more than 3 hours to play through the concerto at that tempo?
Oh, at least.
Yeah, and what was fascinating was the first time that I tried to do that, I couldn't get through like the 4th page. I couldn't remember all the notes that slowly. And what's so interesting is I persevered, and I said, okay, you do not get to give up on this until you can do it. You have to be able to run the piece from beginning to end at that tempo with no score in front of me and remember everything. And I can tell you that completely changed my comfort level with the piece, because when I actually performed it, I felt on stage, even though I was moving quickly, it's like my mind was moving so much faster than my hands that it felt really slow. And I knew exactly, I need to be right here, I need to be right here. I could place every finger where it needed to go because I knew where it was supposed to go. And somehow when we practice faster, it's like we learn clumps of things, but we don't always learn the individual, the bytes of information. So that was pretty transformational for me.
I try practicing that way. I don't last for very long because I'm too impatient, but I do bits of it. I should try that sometime. Thank you for the suggestion.
It's amazing.
I don't play any longer. I'm too old. And also physically, that's difficult at this age.
It is.
I think I play the others. We had talked about that once. I know the first concerto, which was such a really. It sounds like you're bragging, but it was a party piece of mine. I literally could. The Paganini variations was my thing when I was a kid. I did the third when I was 17 in my senior year of high school, and I played it with orchestra twice then.
Wow.
But I only worked on it for like 5 months before that. It was over that period of time.
Wow.
But when I was 14, I learned the Paganini, and I had a thing about it. We have to be a bit compulsive, don't we, as musicians? What is it? What's the term for the psychological diagnosis?
Obsessive compulsive?
Yeah, obsessive compulsive. We have to be.
Yeah.
I just couldn't get enough of.
Oh, I love that.
Oh man, the 8th variation. That's why I learned it.
Yeah.
and so jazzy, and the rest of it, whatever.
Yeah.
And I practiced it like 8 hours a day when I was 14 years old.
Wow.
You're so obsessed with this.
Yeah.
My grandmother was over visiting, and my parents were out, and she said, if you keep on practicing, I'm going to go out and sit in the car. I kept on out and sat in the car.
My gosh.
About that when my parents came back, but and the piano was in a place in the house where everybody heard it. You couldn't get away from it. And I felt bad about that, but that was the way it was in our house.
Same here. Sometimes I would feel sorry for my parents. I mean, my mom is a pianist, and so she liked it, but sometimes my dad would have to go to the other room and blast the TV just to get away from the obsessive practicing.
Your mom is a pianist, and she knows.
Yeah, she knows. In fact, she would listen to what I was doing, and if something wasn't quite right, she let me know pretty quickly.
Well,
very helpful.
family tell you as it is. Well, I mean, I was once showing my parents a performance of the Appassionata I did. It was on a video. And my younger brother came in, and he knows next to nothing. And he said, hey, you really got, I must have been wrong. He said, you got ahead of yourself there.
Wow.
Now that's somebody, well, okay, he might be saying that half the audience would have felt that too, but they wouldn't say it to you, but I'm your brother and I'm going to.
Absolutely. I had one of those. I have two older brothers. The middle brother is not a musician, but he's very musical and he has a great ear. And I remember I was a teenager, and do you remember Ivo Pogorelic put out a recording of the Scarlatti sonatas around?
I heard him play them at Wilmington, Delaware once.
Yeah.
Excellent.
It's one of my favorite recordings of Scarlatti, actually. It's just magnificent playing. And I happened to be learning one of the sonatas that was on that recording. And Pogorelic's trills were so good. They were just so sparkly and clear and precise and beautiful. And I thought, man, I just want to sound like that. And I just couldn't do it. I was about 14 or so, and I was, struggling to get it. And I was just working obsessively. And I remember I would put on the recording, listen to it, and then I would try to do that. And at some point, my brother just saw me doing this process, and he, sort of from the outside, he said, Adam, your trills don't sound as good as his. Like, thank you for that observation. I'll be sure to keep trying.
Yeah. I thought he was going to say to you, maybe now don't keep on trying because it's not going to get there. Just do it your way.
No, well.
Well, and that at the end of the day, and then do it anyway, isn't it? You hear Horowitz, I think I mentioned this earlier, doing something like that set of Moskovsky, which I put up on Facebook the other day. Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, you hear playing like when they go home and go to bed, don't you? But it's so wonderful. But nobody can be Horowitz. Nobody can be Glenn Gould. I mean, my friends at Juilliard who were so impressed by Horowitz, they would sit that, like, they would try to play like that with those fingers.
No. Pointless.
Yeah, it's pointless. And a friend who tried to imitate Glenn Gould, you can't.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, well, I mean, but I have mixed feelings about Gould in general. Yeah. But that's the point. I've heard some things, which I remember once some ornamentation he did in the slow movement of one of the Da Gamba sonatas. I think it was with Leonard Rose. And the ornamentation was really genial. Absolutely genius. Yeah. But I've heard other things, and I think to myself, well, okay, that's a whole other hour of talking.
Yeah. But, Craig, you speak a bunch of languages. How many languages do you speak?
One.
No, that's not true. You're a polyglot.
It depends upon my mood, I find, with some of them. I'm surprised occasionally when I'm in company with Russian people. Suddenly, I'm very surprised what comes out. I'm even surprised in the back of me that I learned some Hebrew before the Rubinstein competition, and I've been to Israel a bunch of times, even recently. And sometimes phrases come out there too, but that doesn't mean that I speak the language. It just means that I know some phrases that make people laugh usually.
But you speak German, right?
I speak German, and my French is the language which I feel most comfortable. And that is the best that I do, and my fairly good.
Italian?
And Italian is also fairly good. I can get by in Spanish. And I can get by in Danish because I was married to a Dane back in the 80s, and we had to go. We went to Denmark. Older relatives didn't speak English. Now her kids, they speak almost we do, and the grandkids. Yeah. But then I actually, and Danish has a Germanic base to it, so you're already there. And so I actually can converse in Danish, but it's not wonderful, but I can.
Amazing.
But no, I mean,
it probably serves you. So you and Greg love to travel. Travel the world. This linguistic prowess must really help you when you're traveling.
But the fact is that it's wonderful when you get to a country and you say something, and you're out in the sticks, so to speak, not in Paris or not in Berlin.
Yeah.
Well, Berlin speaks, but the older people don't. And you're able to talk with them.
Yeah.
You know, I've talked with older French friends about the war. I've talked with them about so many things that they would divulge if they didn't have somebody they felt they could trust in their own language.
Yeah, it makes a difference.
It does make a difference.
For sure. So, Craig, we're going to get to hear you perform a little bit for us, right? What are we going to hear?
You're going to hear the D Nocturne of Chopin. It's one of my favorite pieces. It's something I've played many, many times. And I think it's always an audience pleaser.
Yes.
And
fantastic. Well, let's hear it. Thank you so much for that beautiful performance of the Chopin, Craig. So beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm so glad the audience got to hear at least a little bit of Craig Sheppard this year, almost in the flesh, virtually. And we can look forward to hopefully next year, having an actual in-person festival if the COVID gods allow for it, and we'll get you back for sure.
Good. I'm looking forward to it, Adam, very, very much, and all the best to you and Ariella and your cat.
Oh, well, thank you. She'll be happy to know that you said hi. Craig, thank you for this interview. It's so much fun talking to you. I could talk to you all day, but I think I probably have to let our audience go. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.